Hello, welcome to another episode of Funny Philosophies. In this one, I'm going to be talking about something I've tried to tackle before, and there is a reason I've got this authoritarian symbol on my head, because I'm talking about left, the broadest sense of the word. So, socialists, anarchists, communists, anarcho-communists, libertarian socialists, yada yada yada. And I'm wearing this in a kind of tongue-in-cheek way, so don't hate on it too much. It's just a symbol. Anyway, let's get on with it. Actually, fuck it, I'll take this hat off. It's stupid. Fuck the USSR. Okay, let's get into this. So, what is the left? And I'm going to approach this from a historical perspective, I'm going to approach it from a contemporary perspective, and I'm going to approach it from a theory perspective as well, I suppose. So, what are the origins of the left, as it were? The left wing is, generally speaking, what are the properties of the left wing? It's often associated with, well, it depends what left you're talking about. There's the liberal left, liberalism being a set of principles and ideas which emerged from the Enlightenment, I suppose. And also socialist theory as well, which comes into anarchism in some respects, socialism being the workers being the controls of the means of production. Or the memes of production, indeed, as it tends to be more these days. As a protest movement, I suppose, online. So, the left, let's talk about the origins of left-wing thought. So, a lot of the ideas of liberalism come from the Enlightenment, really. Liberalism being a philosophical, political theory that values the individual, that values freedom of speech, that values freedom to assemble, so it ties in very closely with democratic movements too. I'll get on to socialism in a bit, but I think it's important to just define what liberalism is first, or classical liberalism as it's called, I guess, these days. And yeah, those are the main three things, really. Liberty, a lot of it centres around liberty, really. So there's kind of crossover with libertarianism, which I mean not the American version of libertarianism, but the traditional idea of what libertarianism actually is. Liberty. You co-opted it, bastards. So it's not like free market radicalism, which is what libertarianism is, I think. Essentially, it's more a set of principles of guiding. Yeah, no, it's already 3 minutes already. So let's touch on some history. Now, socialism can generally be divided into two camps. I might miss a few things here and there because this is 20 minutes ago. Utopian socialism and scientific Marxism, I guess. Scientific dialectical materialism. So Marx, obviously, and Engels are the two most key philosophers in modern history, essentially, that have a relevance still within socialism. There's before Marx and Engels, there were socialist thinkers like Thomas More, who was a utopian socialist, as it's called now, who had the idea of workers managing their own environment, worker control of, but Marx and Engels took this further and applied the philosophies of Hegel to the idea of socialism. Socialism being workers in control of the means of production. So the people who produce material goods have control of the means of production for making those goods, because you commonly, especially in the past and really still today in a lot of ways, the capitalist class, which is the rich, have control of the means of production. So they make a profit based on the labour of workers who don't see a fair cut of those profits. That is essentially what the socialist critique of capitalism is about.
Mein Gott. Ein Gespenst geht in Europa. Ein Gespenst geht in Europa, das Gespenst des Kommunismus. Alle Mächte des alten Europas. Alle Mächte des alten Europas. Lass das.
Jenny, lies es ihm vor.
Ein Gespenst geht in Europa. Das Gespenst des Kommunismus. Alle Mächte des alten Europa haben sich zu einer heiligen Hetzjagd gegen dies Gespenst verbündet. Der Papst und der Zar, Metternich und Guizot, französische Radikale und deutsche Polizisten der Gesellschaft. Das macht so keinen Sinn.
Das macht keinen Sinn. Du hast recht, da fehlt der zentrale Absatz. Friedrich, was hast du mit dem zentralen Absatz gemacht? Wo ist der? Schnell. Hier. Es ist hohe Zeit, dass die Kommunisten ihre Anschauungsweise, ihre Zwecke, ihre Tendenzen darlegen und dem Märchen von der Schreckgestalt des Kommunismus oder Gespenst des Kommunismus ein Manifest der Partei selbst entgegenstellen. Zeig mal her. Also, ich würde schreiben, Ihre Anschauungsweise, Ihre Zwecke, Ihre Tendenzen vor der ganzen Welt offen darlegen. Die Geschichte aller bisherigen Gesellschaft ist die Geschichte von Klassenkämpfen. Die Gesellschaft spaltet sich immer mehr in zwei feindliche Lager. In zwei große, einander diametral entgegengesetzte Klassen. Die Bourgeoisie und das Proletariat.
Die Bourgeoisie hat die persönliche Würde in einen einfachen Tauschwert aufgelöst. Und anstelle zahlloser verbriefter und wohlerworbener Freiheiten hat sie die einzig und mitleidslose Freiheit des Handels und des Profits gesetzt. Sie hat dem Familienverhältnis seinen rührend sentimentalen Schleier abgerissen und es auf ein reines Geldverhältnis zurückgeführt. Sie hat die heiligen Schauer der frommen Schwärmerei, der spießbürgerlichen Wehmut in dem eiskalten Wasser egoistischer Berechnung ertränkt. Die Handelskrisen stellen in ihrer periodischen Wiederkehr immer mehr die Existenz der ganzen bürgerlichen Gesellschaft in Frage. Das Bedürfnis nach einem stets ausgedehnteren Absatz für ihre Produkte jagt sie über die Erdkugel. Es entwickelt sich eine Bourgeoisie des allgemeinen Handels und so eine allseitige Abhängigkeit der Nationen voneinander. Die moderne Bourgeoisie ähnelt einem Zauberer, der die teuflischen Kräfte, die er heraufbeschworen hat, nicht mehr unter Kontrolle bringt. Die Waffen, womit die Bourgeoisie den Feudalismus zu Boden geschlagen hat, richten sich jetzt gegen die Bourgeoisie selbst.
And I've not read Das Kapital. I know the kind of summed up version of that. It's supposed to be a very big book. I've read the Communist Manifesto by Marx. I've read a lot of related kind of Marxist philosophers dipped in the art of Anthony Gramsci, member of the Communist Party, and actually a really decent Marxist philosopher. I've read bits of Rosa Luxembourg. Emma Goldman's probably one of my favourite of the left-wing intelligentsia, I suppose, around the 20th century. And a load of other things, but this isn't about who I've read. Like, it's something good.
What do you think about Russia, Miss Goldman?
I consider Russia and America the most interesting countries in the world today.
How about Hitler?
I don't know him and don't want to.
What is your opinion of Italy?
Beautiful country minus Mussolini.
Miss Goldman, should the government here object to your speeches of anarchism, would you change them or leave the country?
I will leave the country rather than deny my ideas. I prefer to stick to my guns.
I'll give you pointers to things below about what these philosophers. So you can read, you can read if you're a volition, really. But yeah, so socialism as an economic and social idea emerged primarily as an idea of the 19th century, I suppose. And a key idea, especially within Marxism, is the power shifting from the capitalist class to the proletariat. The proletariat being the workers and the people within industry who actually produce goods and are the labour force. And it's very much about those people taking back control of the means of production so that they can manage it themselves. Now, this theory, Marxism is a very dense thing. Obviously, it's been interpreted. Marx's ideas have been interpreted very many different ways by different people at different times. It claims to be scientific, so because, like I said, it was informed by Hegel. Hegel being, again, someone I've not read seriously because it's very seriously heavy stuff, but it's informed by Hegel. That's all you need to really need to know, I suppose. And you can read Hegel if you want, but I've never really given that attempt. It's more like a monolith that I've never really approached, but to be honest. So some examples of left-wing societies that have existed in time. You had the French Revolution, which, again, rapidly, like the USSR, even rapidly degenerated, but that was the working class against the aristocratic class. But it did end with quite a lot of horror, with lots of people's heads getting chopped off, which is never really that good. Everyone wants to keep their head. No one likes losing their head. So there was that. And then you had the one I can talk about the most authority, I guess, is the USSR, because I've read quite a lot into the history of that. So and that, I consider that, in my own personal opinion, to be a failed. I think most people would agree these days, now we're in the 21st century, that was a failed socialist revolution in a lot of ways. Well, it was successful, but what it actually turned into was what most people call a degenerated socialist state, I suppose, essentially. So key idea within the developed in the Soviet Union was Lenin's idea of dictatorship of the proletariat, which is essentially that you have dictators in place who make economic decisions so that eventually socialism, the idea being that you have benevolent dictators who are in place who then, until you can fully automate the economy and make it centralised, and until everything's shared out equally and everybody gets a bit of a pie. Now, for myself, any left-wing philosophy that comes with, or any philosophy in general that comes with a word like dictatorship, I'm not really too hot on it, to be honest. And as evidenced by what the Soviet Union turned into, it rapidly degenerated. And I understand in a lot of ways that they're in a wartime situation, the Reds and the Whites. The Reds and the Whites were the revolutionary force of the Bolsheviks. The Bolsheviks were the party that ascended to power eventually in the Soviet Union. You had the Mensheviks as well, who were like the more left social democrats. These terms might be unfamiliar, but I'm trying to cover a lot of ground. You had Lenin, who was in charge of that, who before going into to Russia during the revolution to kind of take charge of the Bolsheviks at that time, was in Europe. He'd done some exile in Siberia as well. I think one of the reasons he's probably so passionate about and quite an orthodox Marxist in a lot of ways, was because his brother was executed by the Tsar for revolutionary activities, which would probably send you a bit west in terms of your political orthodoxy, I suppose. So, Lenin goes to Russia during the revolution. There's a provisional government for a while, and the Bolsheviks assume control of that provisional, and basically the provisional government's done with. Provisional government's a more moderate left kind of, people working together as parties working together. And then Lenin begins then to install his whole slogan was all power to the Soviets being the workers' councils. And then there's a famous episode, which we'll talk about now, of the Kronstadt sailors. So the Kronstadt sailors were a group of sailors, obviously, who were quite key in the Bolsheviks assuming power during the 1917 revolution. But when Lenin started making some changes, they were quite unhappy with a lot of the things that were happening during this time, and they basically got repressed by the Bolshevik party, because the Bolsheviks wanted to bring everybody in line with the communist regime that they were trying to build, the dictatorship of the proletariat. And essentially they were, in my view, and it's only my view obviously, but the Soviet Union became cannibalised rather rapidly. I guess a lot of it probably had to do with those that were in a wartime situation, the Whites, which are the counter-revolutionary forces of the Tsar, yeah, that happened. And then and then Lenin has a stroke. I know I'm missing a lot out here, but I've only got 20 minutes to do this thing. So he goes, has a stroke, and then there's a leadership contest. Now, this is a very key moment in Soviet history, because there's a leadership contest between Trotskyist, who's a combination of a good orator and theorist as well, a bit of writer, all the rest of it. Trotsky's a very key figure in communism in the 20th century, really, in socialism as well. He competes in a leadership contest with Stalin, also known as Koba. Now Koba, or Stalin, I'll call him Koba for now because it's a bit different and not everyone might want to follow that. So it's just his nickname. Koba was basically his nickname. He was doing revolutionary activities back in the day. Like, hey up Koba, how's it going? Get this sorted for us, lad. He was kind of a dirty. So Koba was. He did a lot of the dirty work for the Bolsheviks and the revolutionaries at the time, like robbing, stuff like that. He's a bit of a Jack the Lad, if you will. Koba did a lot of the dirty work for the Bolsheviks, and unsurprisingly, this kind of carried on. And then he won the leadership contest. I guess he smeared Trotsky. I'm not a great expert on that. And then you had the Stalinist era of repression. And then from that, the Soviet Union was just a degenerated socialist in name only, really, society. It still maintained the look of socialism in the kind of, a lot of red. It still maintained the kind of idea of socialism at its core. But really, it was a very repressive society. A lot of people got sent to Siberian death camps, had pogroms, all the rest of it. Pogroms, sorry, I don't know how to pronounce it properly. So there's that, and that's the big elephant in the room when it comes to socialist theory still. If you even bring up socialist theory, sometimes people will just think Stalin, Koba, the Red Terror, all the rest of it, and then not even to mention Mao in China, the Cultural Revolution. Stalin industrialized Russia, so he did that. So he was rapid industrialization, 5-year plans, etc. A lot of people were sent to labour camps and stuff. Dark times. Like I said, there's a very big elephant in the room when it comes to the left. But I'll talk more about the left in contemporary world. So it seems the left is kind of in a kind of resurgence around the world, and there's more of an interest in socialist theory, which is good, because socialist theory socialism is an alternative to capitalism, essentially. It's an alternative model to completely unregulated markets, capital being the driving force in economies, and I think that's a good thing, because you need a kind of checking balance for capitalism, which would be a typical social democrat position, but I'm just laying out the theory here. If capitalists have complete control of the economy, and which they essentially will do if there's a power structure, then you get like a widening of the gap between rich and poor, which in itself produces an equal society. Now, obviously, the idea of socialism is to increase equality, or the idea of communism is full equality, so that the state or the people are willing, have control of their own means of production and their own labour. So it's a brilliant idea. it's failed many times in implementation. There is an interesting example where the Spanish anarchists had a this is an area that I'm less knowledgeable of, so I probably won't talk about this too much, but the Spanish anarchists basically had created an anarchist federation in Spain.
Esto no se abandona nunca. Venga, vamos. Venga, que te vas a Zaragoza. Arriba, Pilar. Marcha.
Until that fell to pieces and Franco got into power. But yeah, so for a while there was a functioning anarchist society in Spain, which is a model that a lot of anarchists these days look to as a model for any kind of potential anarchist society going forward. So you can look up stuff about that. Again, it's an area that I'm still educating myself on, so I'm not an expert on it, it's just imagination. Anarchism. Now this is more the kind of... I have more, like, essentially from my own personal perspective, I have some allegiances with anarchism and theory, anarchist theory. Anarchism has a lot. There's different forms of it, obviously, as you imagine, but that is more that bottom down socialism, really. So it's the main idea. If I had to say there's a key principle in anarchism, it's that any revolution has to come from the workers themselves, the proletariat themselves, and also there has to get rid of a hierarchy in society. That's one of the main aspects of anarchism. It doesn't mean that people running around streets throwing Molotov cocktails at police. That could be a tactic that anarchists could use in certain circumstances, but it is not the key. That's not what anarchism means. Anarchism is a way of managing society so that people manage themselves. So they manage their own workplaces and they manage their own environments and communities.
Los proletarios gritan guerra hasta el fin de la opresión. Borrar rastros del pasado, arriba esclavos todos en pie. El mundo va a cambiar de base, los nada de hoy todo han de ser. Abruguémonos todos en la lucha final. El género humano es la internacional. Abruguémonos todos en la lucha final. El género humano es la internacional. ¡Viva la revolución!
It's self-management, essentially. That's really what anarchism is about. There's a few key thinkers in this. Buchanan, who's again another philosopher I look into. He's almost seen as a kind of alternative to Marx in a lot of respects. He's Potemkin, I think, is another one. Probably said that wrong. Not really looked into him enough. Emma Goldman's a good example of an anarchist. She was actually involved in the Russian Revolution for a while, but I've not read her stuff about the Russian Revolution. Another good person to look at in terms of left theory is Rosa Luxembourg. So Rosa Luxembourg was a member of the German Social Democratic Party during the pre-World War II, pre-World War II, pre-Nazi Party. And her and Karl Liebig something they were both murdered by the nationalists. Basically, they formed something called the Spartacus League, and they tried to basically stage an uprising of workers.
Da wurden wir von allen Seiten niedergebrüllt, verfolgt und in den Kerker geworfen. Und als ich es offen und laut aussprach, was damals niemand in Deutschland auszusprechen wagte, dass Deutschland und seine politischen und militärischen Führer am Kriege schuldig seien, da hieß es, ich sei ein gemeiner Verräter, der den Untergang Deutschlands wolle. Wir hätten es leichter haben können, wenn wir geschwiegen oder in den Chor der Chauvinisten eingestimmt wären. Und jetzt, wo wir abermals unsere Stimmen erheben, um dem deutschen Volk den einzigen Weg zu zeigen, der es aus dem Unglück zur wahren Freiheit, zum dauernden Frieden zu führen vermag, kommen dieselben Menschen, die damals die Wahrheit und uns niederschrien und nehmen ihren alten Feldzug der Lüge und Verleumdung gegen uns wieder auf. Mögen sie geifern und schreien, wir werden unseren geraden Weg der Revolution und des Sozialismus unbekümmert verfolgen. Die große Aufgabe, auf die wir uns so lange vorbereitet haben, drängt der Lösung entgegen. Die Revolution ist da. Aber nicht zur Gewalt, nicht zum Blutvergießen rufen wir auf, wie unsere Gegner es uns in ihrer Niedertracht zu unterstellen versuchen. Wir rufen auf zu revolutionärer Tatbereitschaft und zur Entfaltung aller Energie, auf dass wir den Neubau der Welt in unsere Hände nehmen. Entweder wir gleiten zurück in den alten Sumpf der Vergangenheit oder wir setzen den Kampf fort bis zur Erlösung der ganzen Menschheit vom Fluche der Knechtschaft. Es lebe die Weltrevolution! Hoch Spartacus! Es lebe Spartacus!
And it won't be wrong.
Sind Sie Frau Rosa Luxembourg? Dem Bild nach müssten Sie es sein.
Wenn Sie es sagen.
Ich nehme an, Sie werden alle weiteren Aussagen verweigern.
Das kommt ganz darauf an, worüber Sie sprechen wollen.
Ihre Unverschämtheiten sind hier fehl am Platz, Frau Luxembourg. Wir sind die Macht im Staat, nicht Sie und Ihre jämmerlichen Bundesgenossen.
Die Geschichte wird Ihnen das Gegenteil beweisen. In welches Gefängnis werde ich gebracht?
Ja, ja.
Wo bist du zu Hause?
Bremen.
Hast du noch Geschwister?
Ja?
Es ist dir nicht erlaubt, mit mir zu reden.
Kommen Sie.
So I've actually talked almost now for 20 minutes. I've almost fully done the whole thing. The left is typically, these days in contemporary society, is, if you're talking about the broad left, you have leftists who tend to be communists or socialists, liberals who tend to be, I believe in the idea of a mixed economy, so social democrats also believe in a mixed economy as well. Anarchists who believe in the traditional ideas of anarchism and try and push for that going forward. But yeah, left's a broad church. You have everything from authoritarian communism, authoritarian socialism like Mao, USSR, etc., to libertarian interpretations of socialism like anarchism, which is essentially a libertarian interpretation of socialism, which is where more I would place myself, I suppose, in terms of what I believe in. Then you have like mixed economies, social democrats, which is more about regulating the worst excesses of capitalism through democracy, democratic systems, or traditional voting. Which I also have some allegiance to, like, you know, I'll vote Labour next time that the voting comes around, and I'm a member of the Labour Party, so that's where like, in terms of democracy, that's where my democratic will finds itself. So yeah, I've yabbered now for 20 minutes about socialist theory and the left. Coffee helped. Thank you for watching. I've been Noir Vortex. Find it interesting, there's some links below.